Okay, the second large point then, what do we know about China today? We know for sure that China is in fact a burgeoning great power, and that China has potential to do wonderful things in the world or to cause considerable difficulty in the world. But it is a rising power. There is no question about that. China's rise began in 1978 when Deng Xiaoping took over. And he had a very good strategy in the way I think about it anyhow. And that strategy, well, there are two phrases that stick in my mind. Deng Xiaoping said, to get rich is glorious. To get rich is glorious. Let's go out and get rich. Let's build the economy of China. Did he succeed? At that moment, China's economy was roughly the size of the Netherlands. And it now is the world's second largest economy, and many analysts think it won't be many more years before it surpasses the United States. And I think that's likely. The second phrase that I associate especially with Deng Xiaoping is Tao Guang Yuan Hui. Tao Guang Yuan Hui, which means, in rough translation, what does it mean? It means to conserve your strength and bide your time. Conserve your strength and bide your time. And Deng did that. China played within the rules that had been established by the United States and other allied powers at the end of World War II. And so China prospered within that context. And China has, this is unprecedented in world history. What China has done in the last 35 years is simply unprecedented and truly remarkable. Now, what's going on these days that gives me pause? Today, China views the world through the prism of what most people call humiliation history. Humiliation history. This is the notion that China was done dirt by the Western powers and Japan in the era really beginning with the first Opium War in 1839 to 1842, and that China suffered grievously at the hands of these imperialist powers. Is there a doubt that that is true? No. Is there a doubt that the Western powers took advantage, and Japan took advantage of China? There's no doubt. And so there again, China has the right and perhaps the need to say those things. What is concerning, however, is that China since 1989, since Tiananmen, has twisted the historical teachings in the schools, the primary and secondary schools, to create a subjective view of history which cannot be justified. And it is very selective, and you have almost propaganda being taught about China's position in the world. And so nationalism is being fed by this view of humiliation history. So for instance, if you look at one textbook that I looked at, the textbook says that China won World War II. The United States played a minor role. Well, that's just simply unfactual. China played a major role in World War II, but it was the United States, by and large, that defeated the Japanese. Now, in conjunction with China, to be sure, but to say that China did it on its own is simply to twist history. Those kinds of things are concerning because people come away with the wrong view of what history is about and about the history of the country. What does the United States do, however? Something similar. And so the United States has a view of its own past which is twisted and not clear and unjustified. And it uses propaganda in the schools as well. I'm going to jump to that point. It's later on in this lecture, but this lecture is already getting too long. My state, the state of Colorado now, there's a very large and wealthy county called Jefferson County. And in that county, advanced placement U.S. history courses are taught. And they are taught from a vantage point of almost pure, unbiased, straightforward history. But the school board, which is very conservative, and a new school board in this district, is now saying we have to change the advanced placement history courses because they tell nasty things about the United States. Things like the exploitation of black people, things about like the anti-immigration sentiment. Or they might even point out that the United States has one of the worst Gini indexes in the world. That is, it's the growing inequality of the United States. China has another terrible Gini index. So those things are telling the truth about history. And so the conservatives who control that school board are saying we need to revise the advanced placement history courses. Well, the students took to the streets, folks. They did. I'm not drawing a parallel to Occupy. I don't want to do that. But they did take to the streets, and they stopped the school board dead in their tracks. And so those AP courses will be as designed. But my point is not that so much, but is simply to say, my goodness, you can do some things to keep the integrity of China's history, and those need to be dealt with. The significant military buildup of China concerns many people. And let's look at a couple of maps just to show this. This is still part of the burgeoning development of China these days. If you can read that, it says China's irritable border syndrome. It's a play on words, obviously. But look at China. There are 14 different countries that surround China. 14. Some of them are not the most friendly places. Japan is certainly not a friendly place. And here's the American dilemma. The Americans have never been able to be friendly with China and Japan at the same time. Just can't pull it off. And so now that's Obama's problem. If China is concerned about the Yellow Sea, the East China Sea particularly, here the Ryukyus and the Diaoyu are right here. Wow, that's something to be concerned about. South China Sea, here's the Strait of Malacca. And again, I'll say it, 40% of the world's commerce flowing through here, including an awful lot of petroleum. If I were thinking about Chinese strategy, I would say, we got to do something about this. We have to protect our lifeline. The Chinese are looking at the Isthmus of Kra, about in here, with the idea of building a new canal. Scares people. You know all this. And it scares people because it looks like what was going on in 1914 and before 1914. Well, why would the Chinese build that canal? Well, it's, I think, obvious geographically, right? You can sail right here. You can come from over here, the oil countries, and you can sail right through here and you miss this very tight and easily blocked strait. Well, to me, that makes sense. Let's see. One more map. The Chinese and the Americans like to think a lot about the first island chain and the second island chain. The first island chain is roughly coterminous with the 9-dash line. And what China would like, my view, what China would like is to have pretty much firm control of this area. Well, that puts Taiwan in the crosshairs. It also raises questions for the Philippines. It raises some questions for Malaysia and Indonesia. Difficult questions. But you can understand, can you not, that this looks an awful like the American Caribbean Sea? And the Americans took the position that the Caribbean was theirs. And when the Russians came in 1964 to plant missiles there, intercontinental missiles, President Kennedy said, no, you cannot. And we were on the verge of global catastrophe, but because he was so skillful and his advisors, he overrode his advisors, and he prevented anything from happening. Well, this is the first island chain. And what the Chinese are saying, I think, is that get out of here, United States. Move away. So the Americans are saying, okay, we'll move out here. And China's intercontinental, almost, ICBMs can reach here all right, but over here, these bases would not be reachable. Well, that's a part of the American military strategy for dealing with China's rise as a great power. Questionable. Now, what is China's, oops, keep using the wrong pointer. What's China's real sphere of influence? I'm not sure that this is an accurate slide at all, but if you look at this, and if you realize that there are some powers like India and Japan, which is outside the sphere, you would recognize that there's a potential for conflict. But I think it's fair to say that the Chinese would view their sphere like that, much as the United States says, well, our sphere is North and South America. So this is conceivable. And there's very big disagreement when the United States wonders what its role is going to be in maintaining that free navigation of the South China Sea. So, if we've said all these things about, oh, one last point. Annual defense spending went up 10.3% in China in 2013. The United States, however, is a little bit different, isn't it? That's the United States spending. That's China. If you were Chinese, and you are, what would you say about that? It's a little scary. But the United States has global responsibilities. At the moment, China does not. But this number is going up. This slide's a couple of years old. This number is going up. The United States, if anything, that number is going down. This is not a true picture of how much both countries spend. It doesn't include National Science Foundation grants in the United States for the perfecting of weaponry. It doesn't include the money spent on the U.S. national labs, again for weaponry, like Y-12 in Tennessee, which is a nuclear weapons plant. So this number is actually bigger if you add up everything. Nonetheless, China is increasing its spending on the military, and it is improving its military to, in time, I think, become a challenge to the United States.